6 months after Central News began its new East Midlands service, the newsroom found itself covering one of the most important stories of the decade. The miners' strike tore apart communities and divided families. Covering the dispute put a real strain on the Central News team.
I'm not resigning! I ain't resigning! I'm fine playing jobs!
It was a very, very tough time to be part of any broadcasting team because the miners certainly weren't friendly to us and to a great extent regarded us as part of the status quo and part of the people who were doing them no good, particularly, of course, when the miners in Nottingham formed their breakaway union. And we had to be ready to take down all signs of, on vehicles or on cameras or anything that labelled us in advance as a television crew coming, certainly if you went to the north of the region.
Look, clear up!
But I think it's in two things probably really stand out: the tremendous dedication of those who decided to stick it out, and the great sorrow that we had that some of our very, very good people, I think quite understandably, chose to go to pastures new.
It was in 1989 that Central News expanded again, this time with the launch of a service for the South Midlands. Broadcasting from a purpose-built studio in Abingdon, Central News South was gifted with the very latest computerised equipment. But there's always a risk in being at the cutting edge of technology. Witness the first night.
Good evening and welcome to the first edition of Central News South, coming to you live from our studios at Abingdon in Oxfordshire.
From Oxford Crown Court, a report from Debbie Kelly. Oh, well, that isn't here just at the moment, I'm sorry to say. We will try to bring that to you a little later on. Anne.
Meanwhile, some more news from Wesley.
Tim Hurst in Gloucester has been finding out more, and he'll be filling us in on that a little later in this programme. Here it comes now. Well, we don't have it. I do apologise for that.
Well, as there's no point us pretending, we are having a lot of problems tonight, I'm afraid, technically, with our video items. All sorts of people are rushing around the building right now trying to sort it all out, but in the meantime, we are very lucky and very honoured to have Eddie Edwards with us. So, Eddie, welcome back. You get twice as much time in our studios.
Thank you.
I'm
honoured.
It was just a complete nightmare, from start to finish. Literally every second of that programme was just our worst dream, wasn't it? Really?
I have actually had that dream. People talk about their nightmares. I have genuinely had a nightmare of that sort of thing happening. So when it does actually happen, you can't believe it. But it was worse when it was over, because while it was happening, we just had to work, didn't we?
We did. And you got the ratings up for the next night.
Yes.
Because loads more people had heard about this thing.
Because we were on the tabloids and we were in all the papers the next day.
Absolute nightmare.
The worst ever television programme.
Fortunately, Eddie the Eagle Edwards was there to help us out.
I feel quite sick just looking at that, Eddie.
Much was learned that night, and Central News South went on to win many an award. And Anne and Wesley are still together after all these years.
We're the longest serving partnership in any ITV region.
I can't believe that. I didn't realise that until very recently. That's great.
Incredible.
Congratulations.
And to you. I think we get to second guess what the other one is thinking somehow, don't we? We have very similar views about how the programme is put together, the sort of stories that we do and the way we approach them. So, we gang up on the producers sometimes.
Oh, we do. We gang up on everybody. We're terrible like that. But I mean, I think it's like a marriage in a way, in that there are days when I know he's in a good mood, and there are other days when I know he's not.
You think, don't go there?
Yeah, you do. Absolutely right. I mean, we never discussed this before. No. We're bringing this all out now.
Maybe we shouldn't be discussing it now.
Hello, good evening. You're watching Central News.
Bob, on the other hand, has had a variety of partners during his career.
No, well, you say you're like your on-screen wife. You just get nagged at home and
That's
here,
right.
don't you?
That's it, yes.
With apologies
yes.
to Di,
I
because
mean,
I'm sure she's not a nag. But...
Fancy coming to work to get nagged, but that's the way it is.
Now, over the years, of course, I've had several on-screen partners. You might even call them almost on-screen wives, really, the way some of the public refer to us. And like all partnerships, some are actually better than others. You warm to some more than others.
Got the running order there.
Well, I'm very busy now. Could you come back a bit later, please? Thank you.
Yep, I've been dumped by a few who've gone off to do great things and become great names. And Diamond was one, of course, who became a great success.
I was very green in those days. I've still got a big picture of me. It's in the garage now, under a lot of cobwebs. But I guess I looked very sort of fresh-faced and innocent, and Bob was the real experienced man. who knew how to do everything.
One relationship has outlasted the others and indeed spanned the whole 20 years.
So now we have sport, and we have a new sports team in the studio this evening. Bob Hall joins our head of sport, Gary Newborn, as the new central sports presenter here in the West.
Not to put too fine a point on it, Bob, we've had a sort of very long on-screen relationship.
We have, haven't we? In fact, it's the longest relationship that either of us have ever managed, I suspect.
So, here we go, Central Sport with Bob Hall.
You know how you bump into people in the street and they say, do you know, I've been watching you for years and you don't change. What a load of rubbish.
You're suggesting we look ever so slightly different.
Thanks very much.
You have more than once used me as a good link out of something, and not least the changing colour of my hair. I mean, I've never mentioned the fact that if the lights are on the back, you know, we get a bit of a flash, but there we are.
Hair colour apart, TV anchormen are fairly immune to changes in fashion. Not so those first ladies of news.
I mean, in the early days, I look back at tapes and I looked like Joan Rivers. I mean, my hair was set into this very hard sort of helmet. It used to take ages to get ready for a bulletin. I can't quite believe I used to look like that. I like to think things have improved now. I think a male presenter can grow old gracefully, whereas I think a female presenter has to really hang on in there and make sure that, well, for instance, you're not wearing the fashions that you were wearing 10 years ago. There are certain things you can't wear. You know, the old mutton dressed as lamb tag that you really don't want when you're on television. I think the thing I find very astonishing is the way the public view you as almost public property. And you can be out somewhere and they will say things to you that they wouldn't dream of saying to a friend. Things like, I don't like the colour of your hair, or my word, you've put on a bit of weight, or, you know, you're not looking very well today. And I mean, you tend to ignore it after a while, but you're very aware of that as you're getting older as a female presenter.
In 1994, Central Television was taken over by Carlton. 3 years later, Central moved its headquarters from the crumbling Broad Street site to a new home around the corner. Central Court was built as a television station for the 21st century, with 750 miles of cabling linking a network of computers. And it took Central News into the digital age. Central Television has disappeared as a brand name from our screens, but the Central News name lives on. We now broadcast more hours of news than ever to each of our 3 regions, using 18 camera crews and a fleet of satellite trucks. And many of the people who cover the news today are the same journalists and technicians who brought you the biggest stories of the past 2 decades.